All right, let's move then to a target company that fits the profile and what W.E.R.S really can do to save a company that's an expensive company that there are no buyers in Wyoming with enough money to buy it. And we'll call that company XYZ. It's a real company. I've had discussions with them. We're moving in the right direction, but I'll profile the company for you. 5 different LLCs, one in each town they operate in Wyoming. In each of those towns, there are a couple of majority owners who split ownership, and then an operating person in those towns who has ownership in that particular market. So the 2 guys that own the majority are my age. They're 67, I believe, and 64. They need a plan. The company's probably worth $20 to $25 million. Their only alternative is to sell upstream out of state, and that would change the nature of the business entirely. Like we've talked about, it would become a colony producing money to ship back home to somebody else. So if we could save this company, that would be a cool thing because it's well capitalized. It's run by experienced people who know what they're doing, so you don't have the issues you have with startups to try to replace them. And they are expansion minded. There are 2 or 3 locations in Wyoming. Their model would work, but when you get to be 67, you begin to question, do I want to take on more big projects, or is it time for me to really kick back and begin to think about, seriously think about selling this? And that's kind of where they're at right now. So wouldn't it be cool if instead of seeing this sell out of state, if we could keep this well-established, well-capitalized, well-run company and make it a regional company that instead of just doing business in Wyoming, we could go to Scottsbluff or Idaho Falls, towns that would fit the model that they're successful in, and begin to colonize other states and bring money back into Wyoming because we built regional companies. That's a powerful thing, okay? Insurance is headed that way. Properties is just really focused on whatever else happens internally here. Mountain West will be focused on Wyoming for an extended period, but this one could immediately go out of state. So how does it work? Well, if the big dogs decide to sell, everybody else along for the ride. They have to sell too. And there are people in this company who could take it over and run it. So what a shame to see it not go to the next 20 or 30 years of life cycle, corporate life cycle, because the humans are aging out. So what could we do to stop them? Well, simplistically put, they merge all their stock in their 5 different enterprises into W.E.R.S. And they get W.E.R.S stock in return. Whatever their pro rata share of that whole organization is, then everybody gets their certificate. And to simplify it, there is some real estate. It would be carved out and dealt with a little differently over here. But let's just keep with the whole thing is worth $25 million. And we'll say that 2 guys have $20 million and the other 3 have $5 million. Just to make it easy, okay? So they all merge in. Now the 2 guys with $10 million each that are up there in age like me have a lot of options. They don't need money. They don't need cash. They really don't want to sell, but they have to before something happens. And they have to sell, and they leave problems behind for somebody else. So now they all have W.E.R.S stock. And it pays a dividend, so there really isn't any need for them to want to sell. They still have all the cushy things that they had before. These are successful business people who have cash in other places because they've been successful. So there really isn't a need to sell. They don't want cash and to have to pay tax on it to get it. But if instead of $10 million all at once or all or nothing, I want to buy a second home in Arizona and it's going to be $1 million on a golf course, sell $1 million worth of stock. You don't have to sell it all. You have liquidity features built in that mean now all 5 of those people, or however many they are, can act independently. They're not joined at the hip to the one guy who decides when they sell. So we've successfully kept the company. Those 5 individuals, if they keep the stock until they die, if they sell any part of it, at that point they're going to pay some taxes. But if they keep it till they die, they get a stepped up basis. They never pay any income tax or capital gains on it. Well, what a great feature. But one of them doesn't have any kids and never been married. So in his case, we will have, I don't know if you can see that or not, but a foundation that's tied to W.E.R.S. The W.E.R.S. Foundation. It's called 307 First. And 307 First has been aggressively pursuing preference for Wyoming companies for the last probably decade. And what that's all about is educational. It will be an educational foundation based on the belief that it does make a difference where you do business in Wyoming. And if you do business with Wyoming-owned businesses where you can and where it makes sense, then look at the opportunities that we have to channel money back into Wyoming. More importantly, when we die, where's a lot of that money going to go to if this is a charitable foundation, which it is? Back to W.E.R.S. because that's what gave them the ability to do all these unique things, right? So we complete the circle of social fabric also. The owners have a reason and a place to go, and this entity is going to be preaching about Wyoming first, do business with Wyoming people. It makes a huge difference. I don't care if you're paying $1,000 a year for home insurance and it only amounts to $100 that channels up here. Take that number, I'll be right there, times 300,000 households, and suddenly it's a big number. And if all the people in Wyoming get together and channel their insurance premiums, and ultimately that 3 or 4 or 5% of the premiums that may stay here, and that all gets reinvested, that could easily become multiple millions of dollars a year. To give you an example, insurance today is channeling about $5 million to W.E.R.S. a year. Properties is generating about $5 million and probably throwing half of that to W.E.R.S. because we have some debt in property. So we have to pay debt service on some of that. But we're starting with $7.5 million a year of free cash flow, pre-tax, to reinvest back into Wyoming companies. Well, take that times 20 or 25 years, and suddenly you're hundreds of millions of dollars that you're reinvesting into saving companies in Wyoming and helping buyers, Wyoming buyers, keep Wyoming-owned companies Wyoming-owned. And to try to create a club of people who recognize the value of doing business with their Wyoming counterparts, because it's huge collectively. It doesn't seem like much. There's a lot of apathy and a lot of ignorance. You can't make me understand why people still do business with out-of-state insurance agencies. It makes no sense to me because it's the same product for the same price. Why ship all the profits out of state when there is a better alternative? Another way structurally we can help people in Wyoming is oftentimes you have somebody with a piece of real estate that they don't have a lot of basis in. An example would be a rancher that has a $5 million piece of real estate and they don't really want to sell it, pay the tax, and try and reinvest it. So they're looking to do a 1031 exchange, which is to replace it with income-producing property. And that is really an onerous process. You have to find that piece of real estate. It all has to match up. There are time frames involved. It's pretty complicated. And it can be frustrating. And in the end of it, you end up owning a piece of real estate that you still have to take care of or pay somebody to take care of. So in lieu of that, there are a couple of ways that W.E.R.S. could enter into it for purposes of an acceptable alternative to what we just described. And basically the way that would work is one of two ways. You could sell the property. If you have replacement property that you want to buy, you could buy it. And you have to keep that property for at least a year and a day. And then you're free to do whatever with it, but if you sell it, you're still exposed to the taxes you were trying to avoid in the first place. So in lieu of that, if you've owned that replacement property for a year and a day, it's a tax-free exchange to put that asset, that piece of property, into, in essence, properties, but into W.E.R.S., and you take preferred stock or common stock in exchange for that. And the difference there is, if you just like the value, if it was $5 million and you knew you could live comfortably on, it was throwing off a 4% dividend, $200,000 a year, and that's all you ever wanted out of it. Guaranteed safety on the principal amount and a couple $100,000 a year in dividends, and you live comfortably, and you want to keep that stock until you die because then you don't have to pay the income tax that you've been trying to avoid, then simply put, W.E.R.S. would take that piece of property. It becomes part of this down here. If it decided it wanted to sell it for whatever reason, because it could sell it for $5 million or maybe more, it can do that, and it just becomes part of the W.E.R.S organization. You still have stock in the corporation, so you really haven't given up anything. You have the value, you have the income, but you don't have to manage it. You don't have to pay somebody to manage it. It's already part of this structure. If you back that up a little bit, instead of having to find the replacement property, if you have a buyer for your ranch, which is when you start looking for replacement property, you've got a buyer, you've got a price, it would be easier to just put that piece of property in before you sell it, have W.E.R.S sell it for the agreed upon price to the buyer. You have a tax-free, tax-deferred exchange going in, so you don't have to worry about replacement property or the rest of the nonsense. W.E.R.S will sell it. It becomes a pre-tax to a large extent capital contribution to W.E.R.S. Whew, doesn't get any better than that. Okay? So just a way that real estate is an important part of what we do longer term. So I've touched on the 100% owned, the ones we're going to get there, the markets we're in, the importance of the foundation and the part of the social fabric that W.E.R.S will become, much like many of the larger foundations in Casper, a place that people look to for that social, cultural part of Wyoming that's a huge part of what this is all about. This stands for Wyoming Employee Resource Capital and Services. And when I came up with that in 1990, it was based on the most important part of running a business in order. And I wanted to be in Wyoming. The employee resource is by far the most important part, but without capital, it doesn't work. And you have to have a service. And a service is, it could be a product that provides a service or a utility, but it worked better for the acronym to have something with an S. So instead of product, I used service. So that's what W.E.R.S stands for. And basically, I'm dedicating it. I will stand down. I am right now the majority shareholder of W.E.R.S, and I'm going to put my stock in my kids' trust and tie it up for 25 years. It can't be sold. Which means that W.E.R.S doesn't have to worry about buying its biggest shareholder out for an extended period of time, and the monies that are generated and flowing up and back into the Wyoming economy don't have to discount my money coming out because I could care less. That's not what I'm in this for. If I wanted a bunch of money, I would have sold insurance when we talked about it 6 months ago. This is about something truly good for Wyoming, that this isn't a socially minded investment. It just happens to be a niche that there is a demand for that falls into that socially good, responsible type of investment. But this is a for-profit enterprise. And I will be asking the state for $40 million for 25 years at a low interest rate to provide the liquidity that we need, so that in this case, those people who are taking stock can see clearly the cash sitting there somewhere, so that when they're ready to sell, they know the money's going to be there. We'll have, this company would bring about another $3 million a year in, so we'd be at 8 and well over 10 million a year out of the gate. And this company will probably be another $1 million or $2 million, so we're over $1 million a month starting out. A little bit of debt service, but my guess would be 8 or 9 million a year to reinvest in Wyoming. Take that times 20 years or 25 years. You're talking $500 million if you can compound at all. So this fits well into, I think the state has a program called Endow that longer term is supposed to have a part of that, where they're trying to generate $1 billion of investment through the private sector back into Wyoming. Well, this could certainly fill a big part of that void. And we're always looking for opportunity. Here's one of the cool things about this. If people understand the power of investing through Wyoming companies, this number quickly becomes 10 million, and we're not even at half the market. So these can all be stepped up geometrically if people believe strongly enough in what they're doing, and that in fact it does make a difference. So what we're hoping for is to pull together a group of like-minded people who understand the power of investing together and channeling that back into the Wyoming economy.